I want to turn now to the latest reaction to our story about Governor General Julie Payette and claims that she has harassed and verbally abused staff. Payette's secretary, a deputy of sorts, is promising to improve the environment at Rideau Hall. This after CBC News spoke to 12 sources who say Payette and that very secretary have created a toxic environment. The CBC's Ashley Burke, of course, broke the story yesterday, and she's been gathering reaction ever since. Hi, Ashley. Great to see you. What are you hearing today? Let's start in the reaction area with Rideau Hall.
Well, Rideau Hall is not saying anything publicly today, but behind closed doors, privately, they have talked to staff. I obtained a memo that was sent out actually just hours after a story broke yesterday, and it was from the secretary of the Governor General, Assunta De Lorenzo. And she's also accused of bullying employees, of harassing them, and saying things like calling people incompetent or lazy. She sent out this memo saying, not denying the claims in the story, but saying that she was troubled, to say the least. And I'm just going to read through what she said. De Lorenzo said, I want you to know that I, along with the Governor General and the entire management team, am deeply committed to fostering a healthy work environment. Please be rest assured that the well-being of our employees remains our priority. We're here to listen and take action in order to keep improving our work environment. So a commitment there to try to make things better. The email also goes on to tell staff to talk to their managers, to the ombudsman, to HR, if they do have any complaints. But workers, sources we spoke to said that, look, it feels like a closed loop system, and there's a culture of fear there. I mean, how do you go and file a complaint in writing about someone who allegedly is harassing you? That's at the very top.
And you also said yesterday, because the ombudsman question is, I think, an important one, that there's not exactly like a power to conduct a real independent investigation in that office.
It's not the typical ombudsman you think of. This is an organizational ombudsman. So they can come in, they can create a safe place for you to talk about what's going on, but they do not have the power to investigate and create a public report like we're used to seeing. And they don't even have the power to register complaints. At the most, they can, if they see a systemic problem, they can write a report that then goes to the highest person in the office. In this case, that is Assunta De Lorenzo. So you can see why people call it a closed loop system.
So I know there's been a ton of reaction all over the map. Lots of the emails I'm getting are asking questions about, okay, what happens now? How does this change? Is there a way to remove her? That kind of thing. What kind of political reaction are you getting?
Yeah, well, today the NDP's leader, Jagmeet Singh, said that the stories to him were hard to hear. They were troubling. And he also called on the Prime Minister to launch an independent investigation. But today, Justin Trudeau, he dodged questions going into the House of Commons, and in there, he repeated the same message that his office sent out yesterday, which is, look, no one deserves to work in an environment that should be free of harassment, but didn't go any further and didn't commit to anything. But Heritage Minister Melanie Joly said she was surprised by the story, that she respected Payette, her values at work, and she said that Rideau Hall really needs to address that. Let's take a listen.
This is an issue that my colleagues will have to look into. But obviously, in any workplace, people need to be able to feel comfortable, and definitely Rideau Hall needs to look into this very, very carefully.
Now, other than the Queen, Justin Trudeau is really the only one who can go and sit down and raise issues with Julie Payette. Or he could ask the Queen, look, can I appoint another Governor General early? Her mandate is supposed to end in 2 years from now. Our colleagues at CBC London did talk to Buckingham Palace. They have sent them the story, so spokesperson there is well aware of it, and said that there is no comment at this time and that this is a matter for the Governor General's office here in Canada.
Interesting. All right, thank you so much, Ashley, the CBC's Ashley Burke, with that update. And as you just heard from my colleague Ashley Burke, CBC News has spoken to a dozen sources who allege Payette has yelled at, belittled, and publicly humiliated employees. Her secretary is also accused of that harassment. But last night, she sent an email to staff promising to improve the work environment. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is calling for an investigation into the allegations. Here's his exchange, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the House earlier today.
And will the Prime Minister show leadership and launch an independent investigation?
Every Canadian has the right to a safe, secure workspace free from harassment, and that is extremely important. That's why we move forward on June 22nd with announcements on strengthening the oversight in federally regulated agencies and environments, including the public service.
So should the government be intervening to remedy the situation? Can they? James Moore is a former industry and heritage minister. He's now a senior advisor at Dentons and joins us from Vancouver. Peter Donolo is a former director of communications to former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. He's now the vice chairman of Hill and Knowlton Strategies and joins us from Toronto. Hi to both of you. Wonderful to see you.
Hi.
Mr. Moore, I'm going to start with you. I immediately thought of your name this morning just because of all the events I used to cover where you would be alongside the Governor General. What was your initial impression when you read these allegations?
Well, it's certainly disappointing. Look, I think, Her Excellency Julie Payette, when she became Governor General, was welcomed by everybody. This was not a controversial appointment at the time. There's a tremendous amount of goodwill towards her appointment. There's still 2 of 5 years left in her mandate. So there is time for her to still leave a legacy, I think, of contribution to Canadians far beyond what she's already done in her life as an astronaut and as a leader. So on the specific matter, though, of the personnel issue, I agree with Jagmeet Singh for raising the question. He brought forward the wrong remedy. And I think Prime Minister Trudeau is right that this does need to be rectified, and everybody working, whether it's, at a restaurant in Port Alberni or if it's in Rideau Hall, all Canadians are due a workplace that is dignified and respectful and respects people's rights and to have a proper work environment. So I hope the Governor General does take that to heart and does have an appropriate process. This is a troubling thing, and so I'm not going to speak to the criticisms and the matter at hand. But I certainly think that Governor General Payette needs to recognize that her time as Governor General from 2017 through until now, frankly, has not been a successful one, and she needs to remedy these internal matters and outwardly face for the final 2 years of her mandate and leave a legacy that is a real legacy of contribution to Canadians.
Mr. Donolo, you've written about the monarchy before. You've also written specifically about the process through which the Governor General is selected. What did you think when you read this?
Actually, this should have been nipped in the bud 2 years ago. It was clear. There were news stories about the problems in her office over the last years. The Prime Minister's office, Privy Council office, had an obligation when it was clear that things were not working in her office to step in, have a good talk with her and her secretary. Remember, the secretary, to call her secretary kind of makes her sound like a minor figure. She's actually got deputy minister status. She's a very senior person. They should have spoken to them and said, this is not acceptable. You need to fix it. And that's what happens. The Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office are responsible for the, all the offices in the government. And for this not to be working properly, this had red lights flashing over the last 2 years. They should have dealt with it.
Mr. Moore, you've been in the position of working alongside the Governor General, of being in cabinet as well. Is it something could something like that happen wherein it's kind of behind the scenes, but the matter is more specifically addressed, I could say, by the Prime Minister, by his delegates? Should that conversation have happened?
No question. Look, we wouldn't tolerate this at a museum in Canada. And there was a story a few weeks ago at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg that was remedied internally by some leadership in that museum stepping forward and doing, I think, the right thing for the institution. This has happened before in Canada as well with lieutenants governors across the country. And so certainly this needs to be remedied. The government does need to take a leadership role. And I think Governor General Payette needs to welcome in the kind of voices and personnel into her office that would clean these things up. On matters like this, when it's a question of confidence of the competence of the Governor General, I think matters like this are dealt with through important personnel changes. Policy is personnel when it comes to these kinds of matters. Bringing in a serious person who can clean up the anxiety that I think a lot of people have about the deterioration of the quality of the Governor General's office is really important. And let's not forget as well that this is a minority parliament. This is not simply a symbolic office. This is a hugely important office that has to have the confidence of Canadians, has to have the confidence of parliamentarians. We have had crises in the recent past where the Governor General was called upon to make a critical decision about the confidence of Parliament, the confidence of this country through, at that time, the worst economic crisis since the Second World War. There's no reason to think that this office may not be called upon to do something equally as important. And Canadians have to have confidence that the Governor General can manage the big stuff. And they're not going to have that confidence until they know that they can manage some of the smaller stuff, which is the importance of having a work environment that is respectful and appropriate for people who work at Rideau Hall. There's been a bit of an evolution, Mr. Donolo, in the last 24 hours of the government's response. Initially, it was, referred us to the Rideau Hall statement and an emphasis on the idea that that the concept of a safe workplace is important. Today, we heard Minister Joly, as my colleague Ashley just showed us, say that the allegations need to be looked into. We don't really have any details about how that may happen. If you were giving advice to this Prime Minister, as you have done for former ones, what would you be telling him to
to do in this instance?
I would say the Governor General's got to dump her secretary, get rid of her, and get someone in there, someone experienced with government, with public service in there to run Rideau Hall properly, to motivate the Governor General to get her office running smoothly. You know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We've seen a Governor General who's not really interested in doing a lot of activities. There's been stories about how she doesn't really want to get out there. She's not motivated. This needs to, you need a turnaround job on this, and that's what has to happen. And as I say, I think the government dropped the ball on this 2 years ago when it became clear that Payette was not interested in doing the job and that there were problems in her office. I'll tell you, Vashti, this never would have happened under Prime Minister Chrétien. I doubt it would have happened under Prime Minister Harper, who James Moore worked for. You know, I remember when Romeo LeBlanc was nominated to the position of Governor General, he was told by the Prime Minister, first thing before you even get in there, you have to marry your partner who you've been living with for a while, because that's part of the job. There are things you sign on to when you're Governor General, and there's some basic criteria that you need to meet. And the Prime Minister of the day has a responsibility to make sure those are being upheld.
Why do you say, let me just quickly follow up if you don't mind, why do you say that you don't think that would have happened under other prime ministers?
Because they understood the value. You know, here we have a very interesting case where, listen, she's an impressive, very impressive woman. She's held all sorts of positions. Her biography is super impressive, but she's completely inexperienced when it comes to the vice-regal position. That's why she should have been teamed up with someone who had a knowledge of government, had knowledge of how the Constitution works, and the office of the Governor General. And that was not done. She was allowed to bring in her own, top aide, and we've seen the disaster that's developed. I think people who understand government would have understood right from the beginning that this had disaster stamped all over it.
Can we give them, Mr. Moore, any benefit of the doubt that perhaps they had, they looked at that biography and they assumed the best, and maybe she wanted somebody there to help make her comfortable in the role? I don't know. What you've been in the position of government.
Sure, that may well be true, but in circumstances like this, and certainly in offices of high public exposure, it's a one-strike-you're-out rule. And, if you look at Julie Payette's resume, it's incredibly impressive. Engineering degree, astronaut, all these things, incredibly impressive. But if you look at her CV, the one gaping hole that is there is that she does not have a background in executive leadership. And so, as Peter said, she brought in some of her own folks, and it hasn't worked out. The government has an obligation to ensure that Canadians have confidence in this office, because, as I said, crises happen. COVID happens. The 08-09 economic crisis happened, and the parliamentary crisis and politics that came after it happened. These things can happen. This is a serious office that requires serious people of tremendous capacity and the confidence of Parliament and Canadians. And that has been deeply wounded by the actions of Julie Payette in the first half of her mandate. And she needs to fix it. And the government has an obligation to ensure that she fixes it.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Really appreciate your time and your insights this evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. James
Moore, of course, former Heritage Minister. Peter Donolo, former Director of Communications to then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Hi, I'm Vashti Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.